Around 20,000 years ago, in the late Pleistocene, the mammoth steppe endured temperatures near -40 degrees Celsius, creating a frozen open landscape where survival depended on resisting extreme cold. Here, cold was a constant physical force, intensified by sweeping winds that stripped heat from exposed bodies across the open mammoth steppe. The ground itself remained locked in permafrost, limiting plant growth and shortening summers, which meant that every large herbivore had to survive long winters with reduced food and persistent freezing temperatures. For a massive animal, size alone was not enough to guarantee warmth, because large bodies still lose heat through exposed surfaces, especially when wind and sub-zero air combine to accelerate cooling. The challenge facing the woolly mammoth was therefore not speed or strength, but heat retention, the ability to maintain a stable internal temperature while the external world remained locked in ice. Unlike predators that relied on bursts of motion, the woolly mammoth had to endure the cold continuously, day and night, through months when temperatures rarely rose above freezing. This meant that survival depended on a body designed not merely to withstand brief exposure, but to function efficiently within a permanently frozen ecosystem shaped by ice and wind. To understand how the woolly mammoth survived here, we must examine the system that kept heat inside its body, beginning with the outermost layer that faced the frozen air directly. The first defense against this frozen environment was fur, and the woolly mammoth did not rely on a single coat, but on a layered system built to trap heat before it escaped. Long outer guard hairs formed the visible layer, extending well beyond the body and shielding the skin from direct exposure to wind and drifting snow. Beneath those long strands lay a dense underfur, shorter and softer, designed to trap pockets of air close to the skin. Those trapped air pockets acted as insulation because still air slows the transfer of heat from the body to the freezing surroundings. Together, these layers created a protective microclimate, reducing how quickly external cold could penetrate toward the skin. The coat was not static. Seasonal changes likely altered thickness, allowing the woolly mammoth to adjust insulation as temperature shifted. Genetic analysis of preserved remains even reveals variations in hair color, confirming that these coats were real biological structures, not artistic reconstruction. Long outer hairs also disrupted airflow, breaking up wind currents that would otherwise accelerate heat loss across the surface. By reducing direct exposure and slowing convection, the fur system acted as a continuous barrier between body heat and sub-zero air. But fur alone could not solve the cold problem entirely, which is why a second layer of insulation existed beneath the surface. Beneath the thick fur of the woolly mammoth lay a second defense against the cold, a substantial layer of subcutaneous fat positioned directly under the skin. This fat layer worked as internal insulation, slowing the transfer of body heat toward the freezing air beyond the fur. Unlike fur, which blocks wind, fat reduces conductive heat loss, preserving warmth within the animal's core. Estimates suggest that this insulating layer could reach several centimeters in thickness, adding both protection and stored energy. Fat served a dual function. It retained heat and acted as a metabolic reserve during long periods of limited food availability. During winter, when vegetation was buried beneath snow, stored fat helped maintain stable body temperature without constant feeding. This internal insulation also reduced rapid temperature fluctuations, allowing the woolly mammoth to maintain a steady thermal balance despite external extremes. By combining fur and fat, the animal created a layered barrier, blocking wind outside and conserving heat inside. Neither layer alone would have been sufficient, but together they formed an integrated system adapted to prolonged sub-zero exposure. Yet insulation alone could not guarantee survival, because the very shape of the woolly mammoth's body also played a critical role in how heat was conserved. The body of the woolly mammoth was not shaped randomly. Its rounded form reduced exposed surface area relative to its massive internal volume. In cold climates, a lower surface-to-volume ratio slows heat loss, allowing large animals to retain warmth more efficiently. Compared to modern elephants, the woolly mammoth appeared more compact, with proportions that favored insulation over heat release. Shorter legs reduced the amount of tissue exposed to freezing air, minimizing unnecessary heat exchange with the environment. Its tail was also shorter than that of modern elephants, limiting extremities that would otherwise lose heat rapidly. Perhaps the most striking difference was in the ears, which were dramatically smaller than those of the African elephant. Large ears act as heat radiators in warm climates, but in freezing air, they would accelerate dangerous heat loss. By reducing ear size, the woolly mammoth limited exposed vascular surfaces, conserving precious body heat during long winters. These proportions align with a broader biological principle. Animals in colder regions tend to have smaller extremities. Through geometry alone, the woolly mammoth transformed its entire body into a structure designed to conserve heat. Even with fur and fat, internal systems had to function in sub-zero air, because extreme cold directly affects how blood carries oxygen through the body. In low temperatures, hemoglobin can bind oxygen too tightly, preventing tissues from receiving what they need to stay warm. Genetic studies suggest the woolly mammoth possessed hemoglobin adapted to release oxygen efficiently, even in freezing conditions. This adaptation ensured that muscles and vital organs continued receiving oxygen despite the surrounding cold. Stable oxygen delivery supports metabolic heat production, allowing the animal to maintain a consistent internal temperature. Blood flow to extremities could also be regulated, reducing heat loss from areas most exposed to the freezing air. These internal adjustments worked silently beneath the surface, complementing the visible layers of fur and fat. Together, circulation and oxygen transport formed the inner core of a system built to sustain life in relentless cold. Moving across frozen ground required energy, and every step taken by the woolly mammoth had to be balanced against the cost of heat loss. Large body mass helped conserve warmth, but it also increased the energy needed for locomotion in deep snow. Rather than relying on speed, the woolly mammoth moved steadily, conserving energy and avoiding unnecessary bursts of motion. In winter, vegetation was sparse and often buried, forcing the animal to manage limited caloric intake carefully. Stored fat became a crucial reserve, fueling metabolism when fresh plant material was difficult to access. Efficient movement reduced unnecessary energy expenditure, preserving internal heat that would otherwise be lost through exertion. Every behavioral decision, from pacing to grazing patterns, influenced how well the woolly mammoth maintained thermal balance. Thus, movement and metabolism were tightly linked to insulation, forming a unified strategy for enduring prolonged glacial conditions. To understand this system fully, it helps to compare the woolly mammoth with the modern African elephant, which faces the opposite thermal challenge. The African elephant uses large ears to release heat, turning surface area into a cooling mechanism in hot climates. The woolly mammoth, by contrast, reduced ear size dramatically, limiting exposed surfaces to conserve warmth in freezing air. Where the elephant's body promotes heat release, the mammoth's structure minimizes it, reflecting two solutions shaped by opposite environments. Yet even a perfectly insulated system has boundaries, because adaptation to extreme cold limits flexibility when conditions shift. A body optimized for ice performs best in ice, and when the environment warms, that same specialization can become a constraint. Every biological system operates within limits, and the thermal design of the woolly mammoth was no exception. It was highly efficient, but only under sustained glacial conditions. As long as temperatures remained low, insulation, body geometry, and blood chemistry worked together in stable balance. The system functioned as a unified whole. But any rapid environmental shift challenges specialization, because traits optimized for extreme cold reduce flexibility in warmer climates. The woolly mammoth was not simply a giant covered in hair, but a complex thermal system engineered for ice, demonstrating how evolution shapes bodies around climate.